Recording in three, two, and one.
There's no time for us. There's no place for us. What is this thing that builds our dreams and tips them away from us? Who wants to live forever? For Chuck.
Welcome to episode 246 of Nerdery Murdering.
Big 246. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Jeffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows, the ups, the down, the good and the bad, the nerd, the murd. I know this episode comes out in May for those who listen to it, but for us, we are back in January and the state of Texas has gone cold.
Hmm.
Matter of fact, most of the nation has. We're not as bad as a lot of places. I mean, down here in deep South Texas, but it was funny because I went to go golf with Chuck yesterday and I went to the range and it was 80 degrees. By the
Ugh.
time we teed off, it was 50. Because I was only on the range an hour. Dropped from 80 to 50 in the matter of an hour, and then it dropped to 30s overnight with a feels like in the 20s due to a very high north wind. We've got like 15, 16 mile an hour winds. Um, what I think is so funny down here, especially because outside of that really weird freeze we had a few years ago that hit the entire state, including down here,
Hmm.
we just don't get freezes down here. Not we don't get ice, we don't get snow. It's a big rarity to get snow down here. It happens, but it's rare. What I think is so funny about that, the shelves at HEB for Staples are empty.
Hmm.
And it's like, people,
It's not,
seriously.
it doesn't freeze down here.
Well, not
If
only
it
that,
does, it's for a couple hours.
not only that, I think it's going to be in the freezing temperatures for like a day, maybe, and then we go back up in the 60s again. I just think it's so funny the panic people get into. Um,
The feels like up here is 4.
yeah, yeah, I've
I'm
seen all the
dripping the
video.
pipes, and yeah, I can't tell the difference between the street and the sidewalk because it's just one solid white sheet.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen videos all over Facebook since last night about what's going on up in DFW. I saw a picture or a video somebody took at one of the Buc-ee's up in Denton, and the parking lot was like empty. The gas pumps were empty. There was like two cars total, and those had to be the employees.
That
Um,
doesn't happen.
no, it doesn't, and it's just so funny. Um, I know there's a lot of places in the country that are very treacherous right now, but
Not down there.
not down here. Definitely not down here. It's just
Did it
it's
even
just
get
funny.
icy down there, or did it just get cold?
It just got cold. We had some misting going on late last night, but it hadn't dropped into freezing yet.
Okay.
I don't think it's supposed to hit the freezing mark until overnight tonight. And I don't think we have any rain on the or any precipitation on the radar coming up. So I don't think it's going to be a big deal. We'll be cold for a little while. That's about it. So it's just anyway, it's just funny
Empty
people
out the
down here
shelves of
just
the store.
emptying
We're
out
gonna
the
get
shelves,
cold.
toilet paper, water, all kinds of things. And I understand the fear, I mean,
Hmm.
we did lose the power grid back when we had that big freeze a few years ago here in Texas. And it was funny, our producer Will was complaining about he was losing some power yesterday.
Yeah.
And he was like, damn, people think that we need to be our own state, but we can't even keep our power grid on. And put a frame around that. We in Texas supply power to about 50% of the nation. If we weren't doing that, we wouldn't have the demand on the power grid. So,
Nope.
it's a little thing, but we do. We
And a
we
lot of people
provide.
think that that was a thing that happened in the 70s. That's not true. When they built that power grid, they built it back in the 30s
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it was like, well, no one else is going to build it for us, so we're going to have to build it ourselves.
right. I mean, the infrastructure was a problem
Hmm.
why we hit the power grid, but it
Yeah.
was the demand on that infrastructure
Yeah.
that what hurt us. They say we're okay for this time, who knows? But yeah, I mean, we provide power for pretty much all of California. I think most of New York and the Northeast, because we ship that power off. Um, and it's that demand. So, but we haven't seen, I haven't seen any flickers down here. I know William had some. I know we had a transformer blow down here. people all over Facebook are like, "Oh, it's the cold," and it's like it hasn't even dropped below 50 yet. Come on, people.
Yeah. No, no, not here. Actually, they cut the power off a couple of days ago
Hmm.
because they were replacing a pole in my neighbor's backyard. I was like, oh, they're
Yeah,
just getting ready. Nice.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
also live right next to a hospital. So,
Right. Yeah, you're on that emergency power grid.
yeah.
Um,
Hey, kids, just FYI, if there's a little regional hospital, yes, you'll get helicopters at night, but your lights won't ever go out. So,
yeah, yeah, that's that emergency power grid that doesn't get interrupted. That's why during that last ice storm, I had to go sleep at the hospital. I mean, because I sleep with a CPAP, I couldn't sleep
mhm.
without it, and so I went down, I got an air mattress and slept in the hospital for 3 days.
Nice.
Um, so yeah, so anyway, I would assume everybody is warmer now that's listening, but yeah, that's what we're dealing with down here.
Bay.
Um, on
Eh,
my what?
but well, the guitarist for one of the people we're talking about, his last name's May. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, I'm uh into Landman season two. I think I've got 2 episodes to go. The second season's been really, really good. Um, Sam Elliott has been amazing in the show. I mean, he's such a sympathetic character, and you just feel bad for him. Um, but it's been such a good season. Have you watched it?
yeah, yeah, I've been watching season two too.
I
I
love
love the pirate dinner episode.
that was funny. I love the scene with Sam Elliott being floated in the pool. I thought that was especially his reaction to it was so funny, so hysterical.
Just
But that
relax.
yeah, just relax. It's been a great season. I've enjoyed the heck out of this season. I did finally get into Stranger Things. I'm on episode 6 as of last night.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I love the love song to the 80s.
Hmm.
As part of Stranger Things. The episodes have been great. Uh, some of them are long. I mean, one of them I finished last night was like, I think an hour and 36 minutes or hour and 40 minutes,
Hmm.
something like that. And then the very next episode was only 47 minutes long. And it's just funny the length of them. But I'll say this about that. The length of the episodes are appropriate for that episode's content so
Yeah,
far.
they're like chapters.
Yeah, nothing has seemed drawn out of place because, like I said, that one that was almost an hour and 40 minutes, or maybe it was an hour and 40 minutes, which I think was episode 4, um, was perfect. And then episode 5, with its 57 minutes, was perfect. They've done a really, really good job of this. Um, I love it. I really, really like it. I really, really like what they've done with this season. I can't wait to finish. I may finish today. I don't know. We'll see. Haven't decided if I'm going to watch the football or Stranger Things yet, to be honest.
Watch
I mean,
Stranger Things.
do what?
Watch Stranger Things. All you need for football is stats.
Well,
You can get those. You can get those uploaded automatically.
yes, but for those of us who like watching football, just watching stats isn't the same.
Why don't you go paint a wall and sit there and watch it dry? It would be way more interesting.
To those of you who don't find football interesting, I can see that. To those of us who do, I watch it. Um, the people I know down here that always throw the big Super Bowl party, they're big Houston Texans fans. So they had 2 back-to-back weeks of parties, and I tell you, they just go all out with the food and everything. The first week was a crab and shrimp boil. The second week was all barbecue, and I remember I was talking to the guy's wife, the couple that lived there. We were talking a few days after the crab boil, and she goes, "Yeah, we're gonna have another party this weekend," but I told him no crab boil, crab shrimp boil. That was expensive. I said, "I bet it was. Why don't you do hot dogs and hamburgers?"
Hot dogs and hamburgers. People like hot dogs and hamburgers. Crab and shrimp. I don't know. You guys
Uh,
aren't that far from the Gulf. It's
no,
right there.
no, we're not, but it's still expensive.
Yeah.
you know. The barbecue was really good. Somebody brought a skirt steak that they marinated up, and I typically don't like skirt steak because it's usually tough. This was tender,
Not if you cook it
super
right.
tender.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
no, it
that's
was
what fajita
perfect.
beef is usually skirt, or it's supposed to be skirt steak.
It is supposed to be skirt, and that's why I generally don't like fajita beef, is because I sometimes find it too tough because there's people who don't know how to cook it right.
Yeah.
If you cook it right, I mean, that stuff should near fall apart, and that's what this was. This stuff was great,
Stuff.
great, great, great. So anyway, that is all I have. I know you've got a big one on the nerdery. You ready to kick it off?
Yeah, this was requested by Chuck. He's like, "Why don't you guys do an episode on Queen?" And I was like, no one ever talks about 80s Queen, so let's talk about 80s Queen.
Cool.
We're going to talk about three albums by Queen: Hot Space, The Works, and A Kind of Magic.
Okay.
Queen were a British rock band formed in London in 1970 by Freddie Mercury, uh, lead vocals, piano, Brian May, who did guitars and vocals, and Roger Taylor, who did drums and vocals, later joined by John Deacon on the bass. Their earliest works were influenced by progressive rock, hard rock, and heavy metal. But the band gradually ventured into more conventional and radio friendly works by incorporating further styles such as arena rock and pop rock. Before forming Queen, May and Taylor had played together in the band Smile. Mercury was a fan of Smile and encouraged them to experiment with more elaborate stage and recording techniques. He joined in 1970 and suggested the name Queen. Deacon was recruited in February of 1971 before the band released their self-titled debut album in 1973, Queen. It first charted in the UK with their second album, Queen 2, in 1974. Sheer Heart Attack later that year and A Night at the Opera in 1975 brought them international success. The latter featured Bohemian Rhapsody, which topped the UK singles charts for 9 weeks and helped popularize the music video format. The band's 1977 album, News of the World, contains We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions, which have become anthems at sporting events. But by the early 80s, Queen were one of the biggest stadium rock bands in the world. Another One Bites the Dust from The Game in 1980 became their best selling single, and their 1981 compilation album, Greatest Hits, is the best selling album in the UK and has been certified 9 times platinum in the US by the RIAA. Their performance at the 1985 Live Aid concert is ranked among the greatest in rock history by various publications. And in August of 1986, Mercury gave his last performance with Queen at Nebworth. Uh, Mercury was diagnosed with HIV and AIDS in 1987. The band released two more albums, The Miracle in 1989 and Innuendo in 1991. On the 23rd of November 1991, Mercury publicly revealed his AIDS diagnosis, and the next day died of bronchial pneumonia, uh, a complication of AIDS. One more album was released featuring Mercury's vocals, 1995's Made in Heaven. Deacon retired in 1997, while May and Taylor continued to make sporadic appearances together since 2004. They have toured as Queen Plus with vocalist Paul Rogers until 2009 and Adam Lambert since 2011. But today we're going to talk about the middle period. We're going to talk about hot spaces. Um, so three of my favorite Queen songs are in this period. Um, Under Pressure, which they recorded with David Bowie, which is on Hot Spaces. Uh, um, Who Wants to Live Forever, which is on It's a Kind of Magic, and Hammer to Fall, which is on The Works. Um, Hot Space is the 10th studio album by British rock band Queen. It was released on 4th of May, 1982 by EMI Recordings in the United Kingdom and by Elektra Records in the United States, marking a notable shift in direction from earlier work. They employed many elements of disco, funk, R&B, dance pop, and new wave music on the album. Um, Combined with the ongoing backlash against disco music, this made the album less popular with fans who prefer the traditional rock style they'd come to associate with the band. Queen's decision to record a dance-oriented album germinated from the massive success of their 1980 hit Another One Bites the Dust in the US. Um, so let's talk about hot spaces. Let's go through the track listing. Staying Power, Dancer, Backchat, Body Language, Action the Day, Put Out the Fire, Life is Real, Calling All Girls, Las Palabras de Amor, Cool Cat, Under Pressure with David Bowie. What do you think about Hot Spaces
So
or Hot
I don't
Space?
I don't know much from it.
It was
Uh
real dance oriented.
yeah, Under Pressure is the only one I really know from it. And I'm not a huge fan of Under Pressure. It's okay to me. I'm more familiar with a little bit of the earlier stuff.
Hmm.
Um, because Hot Space came out after Flash Gordon, which I know that album backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm not as familiar with these three albums. One of my favorite songs of theirs is from these three albums, and we'll get there. It's not on this one. Um, but yeah, it's a little different for me. I prefer a little bit of the earlier Queen than I do this post Flash Gordon era.
Yeah, this stuff is they were experimenting with different synthesizers and stuff.
Hmm.
And during an interview in 1984, Roger Taylor affirmed it was really John Deacon who turned the band towards a more of an R&B sound. Elaborating, he said, "John's always been R&B oriented. Our bass player who wrote Another One Bites the Dust, which turned into our biggest selling record of the year, and I think that was the song that uh, catapulted us into taking that road." But Roger Taylor does think they went a little far and did too much. Everybody in the band feels that way now. They dislike the new sound. Brian May and Taylor were critical of the influences of Paul Printer, Freddie Mercury's personal manager, between 1977 and 1984, and what he had, the stuff on the hold that that dude had on Fred. I don't know if it was ever proven, but a lot of people think that Printer is the one that stole all his money and is also the one that made him HIV positive. That I don't know. I do
Hmm.
know he did take a bunch of his money. um, Queen roadie Peter Hintz wrote, "None of the band cared for Printer apart from Fred, with hints regarding Mercury's favoring of Printer as an act of misguided loyalty." But a lot of people think it was because of Printer that they did Hot Space.
Hmm.
When it turned, it was actually John Deacon because he was the bass player and he wanted to do some more R&B stuff. Um,
Critic, I'm reading here on it. Critics apparently widely considered by critics to be one of Queen's most artistically disappointing albums.
I disagree. I disagree. I honestly think that artistically, I think they were trying to spread their wings on Hot Space,
Hmm.
but they kind of missed the mark a little bit. I'll give you that. It's not as good as the next one. The works is way better. But you could tell they were trying to explore some space because they just didn't want to do arena rock. They
Hmm.
wanted to be a little more hands on, like they'd done the Flash Gordon soundtrack, and they really, really enjoyed the shit out of that.
And that's what I like is the arena rock Queen. That's
Yeah.
that's why I'm not as familiar with this. Um, Even though they do have a song in one of the albums that I think is very arena rock.
But yeah, in my opinion, and I sat down and listened to these again when I was putting this list together. And please go out and check the playlist, as Jeffrey said, especially if you're just like, oh, I know Queen. Yeah, you may not know this Queen. Listen to the stuff, pause it, and then listen to us. You go to the YouTube playlist and do it that way. It is the easiest, best way to listen to what we're talking about, and it makes the most sense. Um, but yeah, Under Pressure is on this record. It is amazing. It is amazing, in my opinion, because it's got Bowie on it. And it was one of those things that they were kind of recording this tune, and Bowie was there at the same time in the recording studio, and they're like, "Hey, you wanna sing the song with us? It's about homeless people." And Bowie was like, "Yeah." And they only sang it live a couple of times. One of them was Live Aid, and after Freddie died, they had a big concert for him, and he sang it with, I believe it was Lisa Stansfield, and it was amazing because at least Stansfield had a really really good range. That's another thing. Everybody talks about Fred's teeth being all messed up. Um, he had a 5 octave vocal range. He didn't ever get. He could have got his teeth fixed because he had extra teeth in his mouth. That's why they stuck out the way they did. He could have got that fixed. He had more than enough money to do it. He was afraid it would interfere with the range of his voice, and that's what made him amazing. He also did an opera album about this time. A lot of people don't know that because um, it only floated around classical musical circles, but he recorded an opera album at exactly the same period of time, which had some influence on some of the vocal ranges in some of these songs. So if you really like a wide vocal range, this is the period where he's really belted it.
Mm.
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of why I love this period. Again, with Hot Space, it's not exactly where you want to be, but they're getting closer. The next album is The Works. It's the 11th studio album by the rock band Queen. It was released on February 20th, 1984 in the US, and the 27th of February in the UK. It was released by EMI Records just shortly after recording for an album had been completed in the United Kingdom, and it's band's first studio album to be released by Capitol Records in the US. After the synth-heavy Hot Space, the album saw the reemergence of Brian May and Roger Taylor's rock sound, while still incorporating the early '80s futuristic electronic music at the behest of Freddie Mercury and John Deacon, um, and the New York funk scene that was going on at the time. I recorded at the Record Plant Studios in LA and Musicland Studios in Munich, Germany, from August of '83 to January of '84. The album's title comes from a comment Taylor made as recording began. Let's give them the works. During the decade after a negative reaction to music videos for I Want to Break Free in the United States, the band decided not to tour North America and lost the top spot in US sales. Everybody got all up in arms about I Want to Break Free because everybody was dressed up as members of this family. Well, some of them were dressed as I think Roger Taylor was dressed as a young schoolgirl, and Freddie Mercury's dressed as a mom, while Brian May was dressed as a dad, and John Deacon was um, dressed as a son. Um, in my opinion, it's really funny, it's really camp, but people got up in arms about it. It's like, dude, it's 3 minutes of people playing a family, and it's the band, and it's funny. Just relax. But back in the mid '80s, people in America could not relax for some reason. Um, in my opinion, the works where they kept that sound from Hot Space, which again, I don't think they quite got there with, and they brought back some of that arena rock sound, you end up with, here are the titles: Radio Gaga, Tear It Up, It's a Hard Life, Man on the Prowl, Machine, or Back to Humans, I Want to Break Free, which is another one of my favorite Queen songs, Keep Passing the Open Windows, Hammer to Fall, and Is This the World We Created? Only 9 songs on this album. Um, what do you think about the works?
So again, this goes past what I really know Queen as. On this one, I only knew 2 songs previously, and that was Radio Gaga and I Want to Break Free. Um,
You don't know Hammer to Fall?
I did not. I've
That
heard it
that is
now.
actually Don's favorite Queen song.
Hmm. Um, but yeah, we're still kind of really past what I liked as Queen. This was not classic Queen to me. None of these 3 albums are classic Queen to me,
Waiting.
and I prefer it the classic way. Um, go Flash and before, and that's where I sit. But those are the only 2 I knew prior to getting into
I'm
this.
singing Radio Gaga in my head. I'm
Oh yeah, I can
sorry.
I can hear that one.
Yeah, Hammer to Fall. I Want to Break Free, which I love. He goes nuts on that one. Radio Gaga, I Want to Break Free, and Hammer to Fall. Just beautiful. And again, they're blending both of those sounds here, which to me is where they're best because Brian May, um, and a lot of people gave him a lot of crap for being a sloppy guitarist. I disagree. That guitar he has, he made himself, like actually built. Like he hollowed out the wood. He made it because he was studying electrical engineering when he was a boy, like 12. And he was like, I can make one of these electric guitars. So he did. And he still has it and he keeps changing it over time. But that sound, that growl sound he's got, the reason nobody else sounds that way is because no one else knows how that guitar works. Because he, for all intents and purposes, manufactured it in his house when he was a preteen. Now, the Complete Works is a box set issued by the rock band Queen in 1985. It contains all of the band's original studio albums, live albums, and non-album tracks to that point. It was available in vinyl format only. So after they released the works, they did a box set called the Complete Works just on top of that thing. So, and what was great about that is a lot of people bought it. So a lot of their previous stuff went back into the charts. Like Killer Queen was never big over here until they released the complete works because we didn't know about it. But because all of that stuff was on there, it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. So that's not really one of the albums we're talking about, but it's also happening in this period of time. The next album, A Kind of Magic, is the 12th studio album by the British rock band Queen. It was released on June the 2nd, 1986 by EMI Records in the UK and by Capitol Records in the US. It is also based around the soundtrack to the film Highlander, directed by Russell Mulcahy. Now, officially, this is not the soundtrack album to Highlander, but this is the soundtrack to Highlander. Um, A Kind of Magic was Queen's first album to be released since they had received acclaim for their performance at the Live Aid concert in 1985. If you have never seen that, pause and Queen at Live Aid. They do a medley, and he starts by getting the audience up on their feet by singing Deo and like does scales with the audience in a question and answer. And everybody is vibing at the same time, and there's like 200,000 people. It is amazing. Um, A Kind of Magic was an immediate hit in the UK, going straight to number one and selling 100,000 copies in its first week. It remained in the UK charts for 63 weeks, selling 600,000 in the UK alone. The album spawned four hit singles, the album's title track, A Kind of Magic, One Vision, Friends Will Be Friends, and Who Wants to Live Forever, which features an orchestra conducted theme by Michael Kamen, while the album's final track, Princes of the Universe, is the theme song to Highlander. Although Queen would release another two albums with Freddie Mercury still alive, A Kind of Magic would turn out to be the last album promoted with a concert tour due to his diagnosis the following year. The album enjoys status as the unofficial soundtrack to the 1986 film Highlander, for which no official soundtrack album was released. The title, A Kind of Magic, derived from one of the lines character Connor McLeod, Christopher Lambert, says to describe his immortality. It's a kind of magic. 6 out of 9 songs on the album appear in the film, although uh, they're different versions. The three songs that did not appear on Highlander are Pain is So Close to Pleasure, Friends Will Be Friends, and One Vision, which featured a year earlier in the film Iron Eagle. Conversely, a recording and theme from New York, made specifically for a scene in Highlander, does not appear on A Kind of Magic, and in fact has never been released in album form to date. Band member Brian May, according to a statement he made on the Greatest Video Hits 2, had at least at one point the intention to work on a proper Highlander soundtrack in the future. In one scene, a snippet of Hammer to Fall plays on the radio, a song from the previous album, The Works. So, the album's tracks are One Vision, A Kind of Magic, 1 Year of Love, Pain is So Close to Pleasure, Friends Will Be Friends, Who Wants to Live Forever, Give Me the Prize or the Kurgan's theme, Don't Lose Your Head, and Princes of the Universe. Now, Don't Lose Your Head also has Joan Armatrading singing on it, um, which is kind of awesome. But how do you feel about It's a Kind of Magic?
So again, we only have a couple on here that I knew previously. Who Wants to Live Forever and Princes of the Universe. Princes of the Universe is one of my favorites of their songs. Um, and that's the one that I say really goes back to more arena rock because
Mm-hmm.
that one really is. It's a great thematic song. I love the fact that it was, if you've seen Highlander, you'll think about this song because this song is perfect
Yeah.
for that movie, of course. Um,
And then their cover of New York, New York, which again, you will never get on an album. You have to watch Highlander. If they're playing it while the Kurgan's driving across the Williamsburg Bridge.
yeah, yeah. Um, but I love those two songs. Who Wants to Live Forever and Prince of the Universe, I think are both phenomenal songs. I love both those songs. But again, two songs off a whole album that I was previously familiar with, and that's it.
Oh, I love this one. This one and The Works, I think, are the best work they ever did. Because again, they blended the electronic sounds because the arena rock sound was getting stale. Yeah, it was great, but you got to throw a little funk into it, and I think that's what they did here, and I don't think they ever got better than this. Again, with Hot Spaces or Hot Space, I keep saying Hot Spaces, it's Hot Space. They didn't hit the mark. There was not enough of the arena rock sound. Um, but when you blend those two together, again, in my humble esteem, that's where these guys come together. The Works and you know,
And I don't think they were going stale with it. I really don't. And I wish they had stayed with that because that's what Queen was to me. And I would have preferred that.
well, that's about it for three albums by Queen. Other than get out and listen to them, kids.
Me
Hot Space,
personally,
The Works, and A Kind of Magic.
listen to earlier albums. And I mean, if you want to hear a masterpiece from start to finish, the Flash Gordon soundtrack
Yeah, the
from
Flash
them,
Gordon soundtrack is pretty fucking awesome. But
start to finish.
they started using keyboards there.
Hmm.
Like they did Flash Gordon and then they did Hot Space right after that. And it's like it's kind of the same sound with the keyboards. They just had more prominent guitar in it, which is why I like the Works because it's basically that sound.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, and it's funny too that the Flash Gordon soundtrack was a huge hit, was
Uh-huh.
an absolute huge hit. They had such critical acclaim for that album, but critics hated the movie.
Yeah,
Um, a lot of people hated the movie. I love the movie. I know it's campy. I know it's cheesy. I know
it
there's
was
some
that was
bad
what they were
acting in
going
it.
for was campy and cheesy.
Well, and there's some bad acting in there too.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's some bad acting for some decent actors.
Dale
That's what
Lar
depresses me.
Dale Arden's line, "I love you, but we only have so many hours to save the earth." It's terrible. It's it's
Yeah.
just a terrible delivery. Um,
She's not a bad actress, but she was terrible in that movie. It's like she walked in, picked up her paycheck, and went, "Okay, let me write out these checks. This is where I'm going to do my acting. I'm just going to put this in the mail right here."
yeah. Max von Sydow in
Yeah,
it. Um, he doesn't act well in that.
no,
None of them really do.
no.
Um, Brian Blessed, Timothy
Yeah, Brian
Dalton,
Blessed. Oh yeah,
the
Timothy
blessed
Dalton
Timothy
was.
Dalton.
Yeah. Well, Brian
So
Blessed was being Brian Blessed.
yes, he was. Yes, he absolutely was. But anyway, so the album was a huge hit, and it's just funny, a huge hit for a movie that was not.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, get out there, listen to Queen, see what you think about. their earlier stuff versus the mid stuff, which is what we just talked about. And then there's even some later stuff because
Yeah,
they went well.
they did two more albums after this period.
Okay, so not as far as I thought they went
No, you did
after this.
Innuendo and oh God, what was the name of the other one? There was the one right before Innuendo and Innuendo. Innuendo is tragic because he knew he was dying when they made it. And
Hmm.
right after they made it, he announced he had HIV and then died the next day. They went just long enough for him to make a video, and you were looking at him, it was like, man, he looks really thin. What's going on? And he'd shaved off his mustache because he couldn't grow the hair there anymore. And people
Yeah,
were like, "Oh my God." Yeah, he was dying.
yeah. But get out there, listen to those. See what you think about Queen. Uh, I'll say it one more time. I think their earlier stuff is better. That's the genre I stay in. Zig likes this middle stuff better, but take a listen, see for yourself.
Yeah.
There's lots of albums you can listen to. And
Yeah, and if you want a recommendation, I would say go with the works. Go with the
well, and
works.
and 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 the other thing I was going to say is I would seriously doubt that you could listen to Queen's discography
Uh-huh.
and come away saying, I've never heard anything they've ever done.
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
seriously doubt it. Yeah, I mean, even today, as so far removed that we are from when Queen albums were released, "We Will Rock You" is still stadium rock to this
Yeah.
day. You would be hard pressed to
If you
not
want
know a Queen
if
song.
if you want some of the arena rock albums, try A Night at the Opera and News of the World. That's what
Hmm.
Jeffrey's talking about. That's
Yeah.
that's when they really hit their stride in the arena rock area.
Yep.
Again,
Yep.
it's not bad. And honestly, Queens like Bowie or Prince. Even if it's a shitty album, there's three or four really good songs on there.
Yeah,
And
I
then
was I
compared to somebody else,
and
it's gold.
that's the funny thing too. I was just reading an article just the other day, and I don't remember what the albums were, but Queen was listed in here as bands that have a phenomenal hit on an album that otherwise sucks.
Mhm.
Queen was listed, and I don't remember the album that they said. It
It
was
was
an article.
probably one of these.
I don't remember. Like I said, I was just
Yeah,
perusing it the other day, so it was just funny that it was there. But thank you for that. Go out there, give it a
you're
listen.
welcome.
We've got our playlist out there. With that, I will step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off the Los Angeles Times, CNN, NBC News, California Department of Justice, AP News, and The Guardian. And this is the story of the Grim Sleeper.
The Grim Sleeper.
So, when we go through these stories, sometimes, honestly, the most dangerous stories are not ones that just explode into view. They're ones that fade into background. And for years, women were all dying in the same city under similar circumstances, and nothing about it felt urgent enough to stop. And not because the violence wasn't real, but because the victims weren't treated as visible. And we hear this from time to time. And this is a story about what happens when attention really arrives too late. This episode continues my ongoing journey, an A to Z walk across America's serial killers, state by state, case by case. I'm doing this not to catalog horror, not to rank violence, but really to understand how these stories begin, how they're missed, and how they're eventually recognized for what they are. We start in Alaska, where isolation shaped both crime and response. We move through Alabama, where ideology turned belief into violence. We pass through Arizona, where silence and time delayed justice for decades. And most recently, Arkansas, where hesitation allowed patterns to remain unseen for far too long. So today, our letter takes us to California. If you hadn't already guessed that. And California brings us to a story that's not about speed and it's not about escalation and not about a killer who demanded attention. It's really about a man who just kind of disappeared in the background in a city that learned to look away. There were victims whose lives were treated as expendable long before anyone realized the pattern existed. The story doesn't unfold all at once. It stretches across decades and across neighborhoods and really across gaps where this attention should have been. Because for years, women were dying and the system did not respond as if something was wrong. This is a case that's really defined by neglect and long pauses and by the assumption that certain lives did not require urgency. So this is the story of Lonnie David Franklin Jr., who is often called the Grim Sleeper. And again,
Lonnie David Franklin Jr.
yeah, and this is California. Before anyone knew his name or before the media coined the nickname, and before investigators even mentioned the word serial, they were already victims. They lived in the same neighborhood and disappeared in the same ways, and they were really kind of mourned quietly, if at all. And to really understand this case, that's where we have to start, not with the killer, but with the environment that really allowed him to remain unseen. So this was South Los Angeles. Um, this is a place that's too often described only by its struggles and rarely by its people. Um, it's a place where lives are lived in close proximity, communities overlap, and survival often requires adaptability rather than attention. And this really matters because context shapes response. In the 1980s and 1990s, South Los Angeles was dealing with layers of instability. There was economic hardship, systemic neglect, a strained relationship with law enforcement that had been building for decades, and trust was very thin, and resources were limited, and certain crimes were treated as expected rather than alarming. Women in these neighborhoods lived with the realities that rarely made headlines. Many were mothers, daughters, and friends. Some worked multiple jobs. Some struggled with housing insecurity. Some battled addiction. Some did not. What they shared was not circumstance, it was invisibility. And when people talk about victims being overlooked, this is what it looks like in practice. Disappearances did not trigger immediate searches. Deaths did not prompt sustained investigation, and patterns weren't assumed. They had to be proven. And improving something requires someone to be listening. For years, women were found dead in South Los Angeles under circumstances that raised questions but failed to generate urgency. Some were discovered outdoors, some in alleys, some in abandoned spaces. Their deaths were often ruled accidental, undetermined, or attributed to lifestyle factors that quietly closed the door on any further inquiry. Each case was treated as an individual tragedy and not something part of something larger, and that separation mattered because serial killers don't always rely on sophistication. Sometimes they rely on predictability, on knowing where attention will go and where it won't. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. did not operate in affluent neighborhoods where a single death could dominate the news cycle. He operated in spaces where death was already normalized. Violence here was familiar enough to be dismissed, and the victims did not come with built-in advocates demanding answers. Because of that, the early signs were not recognized as warnings. They were just absorbed into the background noise of a city that was already caring too much. Um, and this is not about blaming a community. It's just about acknowledging the reality that when systems are stretched thin, they triage. When they triage, some lives are unconsciously deprioritized. By the time investigators would eventually recognize a pattern, years had already passed. Dozens of opportunities to intervene had slipped by unnoticed. But at the beginning, there was no grim sleeper. There was no nickname and no task force and no sense that a serial killer was operating at all. There were only women living their lives in a place where being seen was never guaranteed. And that's really kind of where this story begins. The first deaths connected to Lonnie David Franklin Jr. did not arrive with urgency. They arrived very quietly. A woman was found outdoors, another discovered in an alley, another left in a space already associated with abandonment. And each scene raised questions, and each case carried inconsistencies, and each on its own seemed explainable enough to close. And that's really kind of how the early years unfolded. In the mid 1980s, women in South Los Angeles began turning up dead under circumstances that did not fit neatly into natural causes or obvious accidents. Many had been shot, some had been sexually assaulted, some were left partially clothed or positioned in ways that suggested intent. However, intent is very difficult to prove when no one's looking for it. Um, Investigators responded as they were trained to respond within the limits of time and the environment. Cases were documented, evidence was collected when possible, and autopsies were performed. But without witnesses, without suspects, and without immediate connections to other crimes, the deaths remained isolated in official records. Many of the victims were Black women. Some struggled with addiction, some were engaged in sex work, and
Sex work
some,
is real work.
yeah, yes,
I'm just gonna
it
throw that
is.
out there.
It is. Um, it's it's work that is often marked with violence,
Mhm.
often marked with addiction, often marked with psychological trauma. There's a lot to unpack with that.
Yes.
Some of these women were simply moving through public spaces late at night. And these details matter not because they explain the deaths, but because they shaped how the deaths were interpreted. When a victim is perceived as high risk, the assumption quietly becomes that the danger came with the lifestyle, and that assumption closes doors long before they're consciously shut. Years would pass and the body count grew, but not in ways that forced recognition. There were long gaps between the murders, sometimes years, sometimes nearly a decade, and the spacing was critical. Serial killers are often identified by escalation, or frequency, or repetition that becomes impossible to ignore. Franklin didn't operate that way. He struck sporadically. He would pause, he would wait, and those pauses gave the appearance that whatever happened was over, but in reality, it wasn't. Each time a woman was found dead, investigators were confronted with the same problem: no suspect, no clear link to any previous case. Ballistics evidence existed in some cases, but it was not always preserved or compared across years. Databases that might have flagged similarities did not yet exist in usable form. And the result was a series of deaths that looked tragic but unconnected. Families mourned privately and communities absorbed the loss. And around them, the city kept moving. And this here is one of the most dangerous phases in a serial offender's timeline. This is the period when they are active but unseen, when their crimes are not denied but they're miscalculated. Franklin learned something during these years. He learned that when the attention stopped, that certain deaths did not prompt questions that lasted. He learned that gaps worked in his favor, and he learned that as long as his victims remained invisible to the system, he too could remain invisible. At this stage, there was still no name for what was happening and no pattern recognized, and there was no public acknowledgement that women were being targeted. There were only unanswered deaths scattered across time, waiting for someone to finally connect them. For years, the deaths in South LA followed the same pattern. A body was found, a report was written, an explanation was applied, and the case quietly slipped into the background. Eventually, though, one death disrupted that rhythm, and not because it was more violent, and not because it was more public, but because the circumstances made this dismissal harder. In 2007, the body of Janicia Peters was found in an alley in South LA. She had been shot and she was 25 years old. Unlike many earlier cases, this one just didn't settle into the familiar categories. The location, the injuries, and the evidence left behind raised questions that cannot be easily answered with assumptions about lifestyle or circumstance. More importantly, investigators began to notice something they hadn't allowed themselves to fully acknowledge before. This didn't feel isolated, and the method was familiar. The placement of the body was familiar, and the neighborhood itself was painfully familiar. At that point, when detectives looked back, they saw echoes of earlier cases, not identical, but close enough to be settling. Women shot, left outdoors, found in similar areas, the same quiet aftermath. But for the first time, the question shifted from what happened here to has this happened before? Once a case is viewed through the lens of potential repetition, the entire investigative posture changes. Old files are then pulled, timelines are re-examined, and evidence that once felt inconclusive are reconsidered. And that's really when the scale of the problem began to emerge. Detectives realized they weren't looking at a handful of unrelated deaths. They were looking at a long, fractured series of killings that had been allowed to exist independently for years. Those gaps we had talked about between the murders, once reassuring, now felt very deliberate. The pauses weren't evidence that the danger had passed, they were evidence that the danger had learned patience. This is also the moment when the cost of delay became very clear. Witnesses had moved, memories had faded, and some evidence was no longer recoverable. Time had done what it always does in cases like this: it protected the offender. Still, though, something important had changed. The deaths were no longer being treated as background noise. They were being spoken about in the same room and investigated by the same people. They were examined now as part of a whole rather than fragments, and for the first time, the system was catching up to what the victim's absence had been saying all along. There was a serial killer operating in South LA, and he had been there for decades. Once investigators allowed themselves to say the word serial, everything changed, even though it was slow. Th this was not a moment of sudden clarity, and there was no press conferences and no announcement that a predator had been identified. Instead, they recalibrated. Detectives began pulling files that had never been meant to sit side by side. Deaths separated by years were laid out on tables together, locations were mapped, timelines were compared, ballistics evidence was revisited where it still existed. And what emerged wasn't a clear pattern, it was a fragmented one, different weapons, different decades, different circumstances, but the victims shared critical similarities, and so did the geography. South LA was not just a backdrop, it was now the common denominator. As this picture sharpened, investigators realized they were dealing with a killer who did not escalate in obvious ways. He did not increase frequency, and he did not announce himself, nor did he seek attention. He just paused, and sometimes for years. Those pauses allowed him to avoid detection in ways that more impulsive offenders could not. And each time a gap appeared, it created the illusion that whatever had happened was finished, but it never was. So, as detectives connected these cases, the need for a dedicated effort became unavoidable. Task forces were now formed, and eventually, with that came a name. The media began referring to the unknown suspect as the Grim Sleeper. And this nickname really reflected the most unsettling truth of the case that the killer appeared to go dormant for long stretches of time before resurfacing. It suggested patience, control, and a level of confidence built on knowing exactly where that attention would fade.
I have heard for years that there was a possibly a serial killer operating in LA that nobody talks about. Is this the guy they were talking about?
I couldn't say. I don't know.
I mean, this is something I heard years ago. So it's
I
like,
mean, it
there's
could
a
be.
serial, yeah, there's a
I
serial
couldn't.
killer operating in LA that nobody wants to talk about because he's picking up poor with it.
It certainly could be. I mean, I didn't have anything in here that said this was not talked about. It certainly could be from everything
Yeah,
that are in the details of the case.
that they
Um,
finally put the pieces together.
Yeah, but for the families of the victims, the name the Grim Sleeper was really a double-edged sword. On one hand, it acknowledged what they had suspected for years, that these deaths were connected and that their
Hmm.
loved ones were not isolated tragedy. But on the other, it came too late to preserve certain evidence, too late to interview witnesses, and too late to prevent more deaths. By the time the pattern was formally acknowledged, dozens of opportunities to intervene had already passed. But naming the pattern mattered because once something is named, it cannot be unseen. Once something, once it cannot be unseen, the search for that person behind it begins in earnest. After the pattern was named, the investigation did not suddenly accelerate. There were still no witnesses who I could identify as suspect, no confession waiting to be uncovered, no clear path forward that resembled a traditional arrest. What investigators had instead was evidence, some of it decades old, and the understanding that time had already taken more than it ever gives back. And for years, this case moved forward in inches. Ballistics evidence again was re examined where possible, and links between firearms were explored. There was DNA evidence that existed in some cases, but it was very limited and fragmented, and much of it had been collected before forensic science had the tools to fully interpret it. Without a suspect to compare it to, evidence remained exactly where it always had been, silent. And this is where the reality of long-running cold cases are. They don't stay active because of momentum. They stay alive because someone refuses to let them die. As the years passed and technology began to change rules, DNA analysis improved, databases expanded, techniques that once required certainty could now work with fragments. And slowly, the Grim Sleeper investigation was pulled back into focus. But even then, they proceeded with caution. Investigators were not just trying to identify a killer, they were trying to do it in a way that would hold up decades after delay. Every step had to be deliberate, and every conclusion had to be defensible. Finally, in 2010, law enforcement made a move that would break the case open. They used a tactic that had not existed when the first victims were killed, which is familial DNA searching. So now, instead of looking for an exact match, investigators are searching for relatives. And this idea was very simple in theory, but very complex in execution. If the killer had never been arrested, then perhaps someone in his family had. This search did produce a lead, but not a name yet, but it was a direction. From there, investigators worked very quietly and they conducted surveillance. They collected discarded DNA. And when they finally had enough to compare directly, that's when the silence ended. The DNA matched. The man responsible for decades of deaths had been living openly in the same city where the crimes occurred. He had raised a family, he had gone to work, and he had blended into the background of the very neighborhoods where his victims had disappeared. He had the name Lonnie David Franklin Jr., and so after years of waiting, the grim sleeper finally had a face. When he was arrested in July of 2010, there was no dramatic chase or standoff. No moment that matched the scale of what he was done. He was just taken into quiet custody very quietly. He wasn't hiding in some remote location or living on the fringes of society. He was living in South Los Angeles in a modest home surrounded by neighbors who had no idea who he was or what he had done. One of the most unsettling aspects of a case like this was not how Franklin killed, but just really how close he remained to the world he harmed. He lived in the same communities where his victims had lived and he moved through the same streets. He just existed in plain sight. So when his arrest became public, shock followed quickly, and not because people had been unaware that women were dying, but because the person responsible did not resemble the monster many expected. He didn't fit what they thought was the character of a serial killer. He wasn't a transient. He wasn't visibly unstable. He wasn't someone who stood out. And that's really where that kind of recognition forced a reckoning. If someone like this could operate for decades without detection, then the problem wasn't just the killer, and it's the blind spots that allowed him to persist.
Dude, we've discovered this over the last almost 5 years. It's like the successful serial killers are the ones that look like everybody, that go to work, that clock
Sure,
in.
sure.
Yeah,
Is
the ones they catch early on are the ones that stand out.
Israel Keys,
Uh-huh.
B2K, Dennis Rader,
Hmm.
um, Gary Ridgway, yeah, all these
Yeah.
they were just
So
ordinary
yeah,
people.
your serial killers aren't transients. Stop looking at transients.
Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it
Yeah.
is, though. You do have some that wander. Israel Keys wandered, but he had a home life. He had a
Yeah.
stable home. He just wandered across the country because he realized that um, if he didn't have an MO and traveled randomly, that he'd never be caught.
Yep.
So the prosecution of Franklin was really built on patience. This was not a case driven by eyewitness testimony or confessions. It was built almost entirely on forensics evidence that was collected and preserved across decades. The DNA did link him to multiple murders, and ballistic connected him to others. Photographs recovered from his home depicted women whose investigators believed were additional victims, some identified, some still unknown. And each piece of evidence now told a story the victims themselves could no longer tell. The defense challenged the age of the evidence. They questioned the use of familial DNA. They argued that time had compromised certainty. But time in this case worked both ways. While it delayed justice, it also preserved truth long enough for the science to catch up. And that's what we've been seeing a lot in the last several years. For the families themselves, the trial was not a moment of closure, it was a reopening. Testimony brought back old wounds to the surface, names that had gone years without being spoken publicly were being said aloud in a courtroom. The victims were no longer background noise, and they were the center of this case. In 2016, Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was convicted of 10 counts of murder. He was sentenced to death, and this sentence reflected the scale of the harm, the number of lives taken, and the decades of silence that allowed it to continue. But even in sentencing, there's no illusion that justice could restore what was lost. There's no verdict that can return daughters to parents, no sentence that can undo years of fear, grief, and unanswered question. and no punishment could account for the lives that might have been saved if the pattern had been recognized sooner. All the sentence did was offer acknowledgement that these deaths mattered, the victims were not disposable, and that the silence surrounding their lives and deaths had been wrong. Franklin would later die in prison in 2020 while awaiting execution, but this outcome doesn't change the meaning of the conviction. The truth had been established, the pattern had been named, and the responsibility had been assigned. The story of the Grim Sleeper is really not just about one man. It's about what happens when systems learn to tolerate loss, when deaths are explained instead of examined, and when assumptions replace investigation, when entire communities are conditioned to believe that violence is inevitable. This case exposed how marginalization creates opportunity, not for healing, but for harm. Franklin himself did not rely on cleverness alone. He relied on predictability. He relied on knowing where attention would not linger, and for years he was right. So, as we continue this A to Z journey across America's serial killers, California stands as a reminder that some of the most dangerous patterns are the ones that unfold slowly, not because they are hidden, but because they are ignored. Victims are in this case were not invisible because they lacked value. They were made invisible by a system that failed to look closely enough. The Grim Sleeper was not stopped by instinct or vigilance. He was stopped by persistence and science, and by the refusal to let unanswered deaths remain unanswered forever. This is not a story about fear. It's a story about attention and about what happens when we finally decide to give that attention where it should have been all along. And that's the story of the Grim Sleeper.
Well, thank you, sir. That was fascinating.
Yeah, I was not familiar with the Grim Sleeper. I had never even heard the name. I was a little surprised about that one. I mean,
Yeah.
when you give a serial killer a name like that, typically that's one that I've been familiar with. I've heard
Yeah.
somewhere along the line. So
Yeah,
it was
odd.
just
And like I
interesting.
said, I seem to remember back in it was like the 90s or the early 2000s. Hey, there's a serial killer operating in South Los Angeles that no one's talking about.
It may have been.
It
You
may
know,
have been this guy.
we talked about this in a recent episode. I don't remember which one, but we talked about in a recent episode that there is a rumor currently that there is a serial killer operating in Austin, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
because there's some deaths that seem oddly similar. So don't know. You know, I'm not claiming there is. I'm just telling you that I've read that there is some suspicion. So who knows? We may see one from Austin, Texas. I have no idea, but hopefully that is one that gets attention before there's more and gets
Yeah.
caught before there's more. You know, because that's one of the scary things about serial killers is the fact that it is multiple, and especially ones that operate unknown for a long periods of time. Your Israel Keys, your B2Ks, your Gary Ridgway. Um, and this guy Lonnie David Franklin Jr. When they get to operate for years unseen is just frightening, frightening. So that's it for the murdery for this week.
Well, thanks, sir.
Thank you. That will take us to the end of another awesome week of recording. As always, you can find our episodes and more about us on nerdymurdery.com. You'll also find us on most major podcast platforms. But on our web space, you can find out more about us, and you can also find the link to our YouTube page, which Zig so often update.
Yes, please go check out our YouTube page because you get to hear all of this. You get to hear basically what we're talking about.
Awesome. Appreciate all your work on that.
Thanks, sir.
You can also find the link to our merchandise page, where if you wish to show off your nerdery and murdery fandom, please do consider something from there. It helps us along with our show. Proceeds go directly into the show, and let's face it, with our merchandise on, you look damn good,
Damn good.
damn good. You can also find the link to our Patreon if you wish to become a patron of this show. That, along with our merchandise, again, help that are associated with the cost of this show. It costs to keep us on the air for our storage, for our uploads, and it does cost for me to put that gas in that fabulous Lamborghini that is sitting in my garage.
Hey, no Lamborghini.
Yeah, I don't
Please
have
and
no
thank you.
Lamborghini, please. And yeah, you know, I'll pause on that real quick. Who in their right mind in the state of Texas has a low riding vehicle like a Lamborghini with the hills and bumps. You have to bottom that
Jesus
thing
Christ.
out going a mile down the road.
And if you got nice flat straight roads, you're in traffic all the time.
I know. I know.
Yeah.
I do not understand those. I mean, they're pretty. I understand they're
Mhm.
pretty, but in this state, as bumpy as we are,
Oh
them
yeah.
low-hanging cars, how much damage are you causing that thing just taking it to the damn grocery store? How enjoyable can that ride be? You know, for fuck's sake, I drive an SUV. You know,
Yeah, I drive a sedan 4 door.
yeah,
I need clearance.
yes, yes. But anyway. We do appreciate each and every one of you that purchase our merchandise or become a patron. Uh,
Yeah, please and thank you.
please and thank you. One thing you can do that's completely free to you, it only takes a few minutes of your time, is please leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Like us on Facebook, like us on Spotify, like us on Apple Tunes, anywhere you can like us, follow, ring that bell, leave a 5-star review. Please do, because that really helps us and helps others find our content that may be looking for the information that we talk about. That's where the please and thank you is.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. I guess it's
Oh,
for all of it.
yeah. Please and thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is not scripted. Most of this is in my head,
Yeah.
and sometimes we forget. Um, but last, but certainly not least, as always, we will close out with to our good friend Chuck. You can go to sleep now.
Good night, Chuck.
Good night, Chuck. With that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
and I'm Jeffrey with your murdering.
Cue the music.